The autumn storm raged outside, the rain hammering against the glass panes like 1,000 tiny, angry fists demanding to be let in. The aggressive rhythm outside seemed to sync perfectly with the frantic pounding of my own heart. For what felt like the 100th time, I smoothed my hands down the front of my simple black dress. The fabric was worn, thinning in places, a tactile reminder of everything in my life that I couldn't afford to replace. The waiting room of Blackwood Manor carried a distinct scent, a mixture of lemon furniture, polish and old money, both of which felt equally intimidating to a woman in my position. Mrs. Reynolds, the severe, stiff-backed woman who had introduced herself earlier, peered at me over the rim of her half-moon spectacles. "Mr. Salvatore has absolutely zero tolerance for lateness," she intoned sharply. "You should consider yourself incredibly lucky that he has consented to grant you an audience at all." I swallowed hard, forcing the lump in my throat down. Yes, I truly appreciate the opportunity. Calling it an opportunity was a polite understatement. In reality, desperation was the only thing that had brought me to these doors. I was 3 months overdue on my rent payments, completely lacking health insurance to cover my necessary medications, and now, here I was. This interview represented my final shot at securing employment after being effectively blacklisted from every reputable agency in the city, courtesy of the vindictive lies spread by my former employer. The irony was not lost on me. My potential salvation now lay in the hands of working for the most dangerous man in the state, Antonio Salvatore. Even the mere act of thinking his name sent a cold chill racing down my spine. Suddenly, the heavy double doors swung inward, and Mrs. Reynolds gestured sharply for me to follow her. My sensible, cheap shoes squeaked against the pristine marble flooring, the sound seeming to announce my poverty with every single step I took. The office we stepped into was cavernous, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens now thoroughly drenched by the downpour. A massive desk anchored the space, and behind it sat a man whose sheer presence seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. "Sir," Mrs. Reynolds announced, "this is Charlotte Ellis, the applicant for the position." I had seen photographs of Antonio Salvatore in the newspapers before, but nothing in print could have prepared me for the reality of him. Grainy newspaper images failed to capture the coiled, latent energy of the man, or the way his broad shoulders seemed to strain against the fabric of his impeccably tailored charcoal suit. They couldn't convey the way his olive-toned hands rested on the polished desk with a deceptive casualness. A signet ring glinted on his right hand, gold and onyx, I noted, though I didn't dare stare too long. What struck me most, however, were his eyes. They were as dark as midnight, assessing me with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator deciding whether or not I was prey worth the effort of pursuing. "Sit," he said. His voice was unexpectedly soft, yet it carried an undeniable command. I sank into the leather chair positioned across from him, forcing my spine to remain straight despite the overwhelming urge to curl in on myself for protection. "Your references are problematic," he stated, tapping a finger against a folder that I presumed contained my pitiful resume. "Care to explain why Mrs. Harrington claims you stole from her?" My cheeks burned with humiliation. "I never stole anything, sir." Mrs. Harrington's son made inappropriate advances toward me. When I refused him, he took his revenge by claiming I had taken his mother's jewelry. Something flickered in Salvatore's dark eyes. It might have been interest, or perhaps merely the reflection of the lightning flashing from the storm outside. "And you expect me to believe your word over that of the Harringtons?" His Italian accent became more pronounced with every word, rolling his RS in a way that sent another involuntary shiver through me. "No, sir, I expect nothing," I replied, meeting his gaze directly and surprising myself with my own sudden courage. "But it is the truth, all the same." A man appeared silently at Salvatore's shoulder, muscular, with the telltale bulge beneath his jacket that could only be a concealed firearm. He leaned down and whispered something into his boss's ear. Salvatore gave a single nod, and the man vanished as quietly as he had arrived. "I have a daughter," Salvatore said abruptly, shifting the topic. "She is 8 years old. Her name is Sophia." I nodded slowly, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "Sophia is special," he continued. "She has autism. She does not speak to strangers. She does not like to be touched. She has driven away 7 housekeepers in the past year alone. He leaned forward, those dark eyes boring into mine with intensity. Why should I believe you would be any different? I took a deep, steadying breath. My younger brother has autism, sir. I helped raise him until he was 16, when our parents passed away. I paused, fighting the emotion rising in my throat. He lives in a group home now because I can't. I can't afford to care for him properly. My voice cracked despite my best efforts to maintain composure. I understand the challenges, and I know that every person with autism is different. But I have learned patience, and I know how to create a structured environment. I know how to respect boundaries and recognize patterns. Something changed in his posture then, an almost imperceptible relaxation of his frame. Show me your hands. The request was so unexpected that I complied without thinking, extending my hand's palm up across the desk. His fingers brushed against mine as he turned my hands over, examining them closely. His touch was warm and unexpectedly gentle, sending an electric current shooting up my arms. No rings, no long nails, no polish, he noted with approval. Sophia dislikes these things. They distract her. He released me, and I quickly withdrew my hands, tucking them beneath the desk to hide their sudden trembling. You are younger than I expected, he observed. I'm 26, sir. And no family obligations. No boyfriend who will complain when you stay late. I shook my head. Just my brother. And as I mentioned, he is in the group home. He studied me for a long moment, and I had the distinct impression he was seeing far more than I wanted to reveal. My daughter requires absolute consistency, Miss Ellis. If I hire you, you will live here. Your days off will be scheduled according to Sophia's needs, not yours. You will follow her routine exactly as my staff directs. Any deviation could trigger episodes that are difficult for her. I understand, I said. Do you? His lips curved in what might have been a smile on a different man, but on him, it looked predatory. I doubt that very much. A knock at the door interrupted us. The same guard from before appeared, but this time he wasn't alone. He held the hand of a small girl with cascading dark curls. Her eyes were so like her father's, focused intently on the floor. She wore a pristine white dress with matching tights, but I noticed immediately that one shoe was missing. She rocked slightly on her feet, a self-soothing motion I recognized instantly. Sir, I apologize, the guard said, but Miss Sophia insisted on seeing you. She's become agitated. Salvatore's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The hardness melted away as he rose and moved toward his daughter. It's all right, Marco. Thank you. He crouched before the girl, careful not to touch her. Sophia, Tesoro. What's wrong? The child didn't respond verbally, but her free hand fluttered in a pattern I recognized as a sign of distress. Without thinking, I slipped from my chair and knelt on the floor. Keeping a respectful distance, I noticed a small tear in the girl's tights just below the knee. Her tights are torn, I said softly. And she's missing a shoe. Salvatore's head snapped toward me, surprise evident in his expression. That might be upsetting her, I continued, explaining the sensory issue. The asymmetry and the unexpected sensation against her skin. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small sewing kit, a habit from caring for my brother, who couldn't tolerate tears in his clothing either. May I? After a moment's hesitation, Salvatore nodded. I moved slowly, telegraphing my movements so as not to startle her. Hello, Sophia. I'm Charlotte. I see your tights have a small tear. That must feel strange and uncomfortable. Would it be okay if I fix them for you? I won't touch your skin, just the fabric. The girl didn't look at me, but she stopped rocking. I took that as permission, and with swift, practiced movements, I made a nearly invisible repair to the tights. There, I whispered. All better. Now, shall we find your other shoe? Sometimes things hide from us, don't they? My brother's shoes used to play hide-and-seek all the time. For the first time, Sophia's eyes flickered toward me, though not quite meeting my gaze. Her hand stopped its agitated fluttering. Marco, Salvatore said quietly, never taking his eyes off the scene. Check her bedroom in the hallway for the missing shoe. Sir, we've already. Check again. While Marco disappeared to search, I remained kneeling, not speaking, but humming very softly, a technique that had often calmed my brother during moments of extreme stress. Salvatore watched me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, but I pretended not to notice, keeping my focus entirely on Sophia. "The blue butterfly is back," the little girl suddenly whispered. Her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. Salvatore tensed beside her, his eyes widening fractionally. "Is it a special butterfly?" I asked gently. "It only comes when it's safe," she murmured, her eyes remaining fixed on a point just past my shoulder. Marco returned a moment later, holding a small white shoe. "Found it under her desk, sir." I didn't reach for the shoe. Instead, I said, "Sophia, would you like to put your shoe on, or would you prefer if your father helps you?" "Papa," she said, still not looking at anyone directly. Salvatore took the shoe from Marco and carefully helped his daughter slip it on. Never actually touching her skin, I noted, he just supported the shoe as she pushed her foot into it. "Better?" he asked her. She nodded, then turned and walked out of the room without another word, Marco following close behind her as the door clicked shut. Salvatore remained crouched for a moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally rose and returned to his desk, the hardness had returned to his features, masking whatever vulnerability had just been exposed. "She spoke to you," he said, his tone making it sound almost like an accusation. "Children with autism often surprise us," I replied carefully. "Sophia hasn't spoken a word to any of her previous caregivers. Some of them worked for months without ever hearing her voice." He tapped his fingers against the desk in a rhythmic pattern. 1, 2, 3, pause. Repeat. "The blue butterfly is her indicator. It is her way of telling me she feels safe with someone." I remained silent, sensing the heavy weight of this revelation. "You'll start immediately," he announced. "Mrs. Reynolds will show you to your quarters and explain Sophia's schedule." He pressed a button on his desk intercom. The stiff-backed woman appeared so quickly she must have been waiting just outside the door. "Sir, Miss Ellis will be taking the position," he stated. "Get her settled in the east wing near Sophia's rooms." "Of course, sir." As I rose to follow Mrs. Reynolds, Salvatore's voice stopped me in my tracks. "Miss Ellis." I turned back to face him. "If you ever betray my daughter's trust, or mine, there won't be a place on this earth where you can hide from me." His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made the threat infinitely more terrifying. "Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Mr. Salvatore," I replied. As I followed Mrs. Reynolds through the maze of hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a deal with the devil himself. What I didn't know then was how completely that deal would transform both our lives, or how thin the line between protection and possession truly was. That night, as I unpacked my meager belongings in a room larger than my entire former apartment, I caught a glimpse of myself in the ornate mirror. My brown hair was coming loose from its practical bun, and my eyes looked too large for my face, bright with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Fear, yes, but something else, too. A dangerous flicker of hope. A sharp knock on my door made me jump. Mrs. Reynolds stood there with a stack of neatly folded clothing. "Your uniforms," she said crisply. "Mr. Salvatore requires all staff to dress appropriately. You'll find everything you need here." She laid them on the bed, simple, but clearly expensive dresses in navy and charcoal. "Sophia's schedule," she continued, handing me a typed sheet. "Memorize it. Any deviation causes her significant distress." I scanned the meticulous, hour-by-hour breakdown of the child's day. "One more thing," Mrs. Reynolds added, her voice dropping slightly as she turned to leave. "Mr. Salvatore is very protective of his daughter. The last housekeeper who upset Sophia, well, she disappeared rather suddenly. With that parting warning hanging in the air, she left me alone with my thoughts, and the weight of the world I had just stepped into." The rain continued to hammer against the glass, transforming the windows into the bars of a luxurious prison. My first week at Blackwood Manor dissolved into a haze of rigid routines and unspoken laws. Sophia's itinerary was treated like a sacred scripture, adhered to with religious exactitude. The morning meal was served at 7:15 a.m. sharp, never a minute earlier at 7:14, nor a minute later at 7:16. Mondays and Wednesdays were strictly reserved for strawberry yogurt. Tuesdays and Thursdays required oatmeal garnished with exactly 6 blueberries, while Fridays meant cinnamon toast sliced into flawless triangles. Weekends were dedicated to pancakes shaped like butterflies, with the syrup served in a separate vessel, forbidden from touching the food until Sophia deemed it time. I realized quickly that Sophia's existence functioned on patterns invisible to the rest of the world, yet the consequences were devastating if those patterns were disrupted. My own life revolved entirely around hers. I was awake by 6 a.m. to organize her day and asleep long after she had gone to bed at precisely 8:30 p.m., once I had prepared her clothing for the following morning and inspected her room for any alterations that might cause distress. The most surprising aspect of life at the manor was how infrequently I saw Antonio Salvatore. He was like a phantom in his own estate, appearing without notice and vanishing just as abruptly. When he did materialize, the demeanor of the entire household shifted. Spines stiffened, voices dropped to hushed whispers, and eyes were averted. Even Mrs. Reynolds, with her constant air of disapproval, softened in his presence, her sharp tones becoming almost deferential. I caught fleeting glimpses of him in the corridors, always flanked by men in dark suits with vigilant eyes. Occasionally, I would spot him in Sophia's doorway late at night, simply watching her sleep, his expression obscured by the shadows. He never acknowledged my presence during these moments, yet I felt the weight of his gaze tracking me long after he had disappeared. On my 8th day, while I was assisting Sophia with her morning regimen, she suddenly spoke. "Papa has meetings on Tuesdays." I nearly dropped the hairbrush. These were the first words she had directed at me since our initial meeting in her father's office. "Does he?" I kept my voice casual, continuing to brush her dark curls with exactly 20 strokes per section, no more, no less. "Bad men come on Tuesdays," she whispered. Later, in the basement, she aligned her colored pencils with mathematical rigor, arranging them in a perfect spectrum. "They are afraid of him." I swallowed nervously. "Many people find new situations frightening," I said carefully. "Not you." She finally looked up at me, her dark eyes so similar to her father's that my breath caught in my throat. "You aren't afraid of Papa." Before I could formulate a response to this startling insight, Mrs. Reynolds appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Ellis, Mr. Salvatore wishes to see you in his study." Immediately, my stomach knotted. Had I violated an unwritten rule or disrupted a crucial pattern? "I will be right back, Sophia," I promised, placing the hairbrush exactly where she preferred it. The little girl did not acknowledge my departure, already consumed by her meticulous drawing. I followed Mrs. Reynolds through the labyrinth of hallways, my mind racing through every interaction of the past week, hunting for errors. We halted before the same imposing double doors I had first entered over a week ago. "Enter," came Salvatore's voice before Mrs. Reynolds could even knock. She opened the door for me but remained in the hall. The heavy wood shut behind me with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Antonio Salvatore stood with his back to me, looking out at the garden where autumn was painting the trees in fiery hues. His suit today was a deep midnight blue, tailored to accentuate the breadth of his shoulders. A glass of amber liquid rested in his hand. "You have made quite an impression on my daughter, Miss Ellis." I clasped my hands together to stop them from trembling. "I hope a positive one, sir." He turned then, and I was struck once more by the intensity of his stare. There was something different about him today, a tension in the set of his jaw, a tightness around his eyes. "Sophia showed me this." He lifted a piece of paper from his desk and extended it toward me. I stepped forward to accept it, careful to avoid brushing his fingers. It was one of Sophia's drawings, a blue butterfly hovering next to a figure with brown hair pulled back in a bun. It was unmistakably me. "She is very talented," I said softly. "She has never drawn anyone outside the family before." He moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and subtle, with notes of cedar and spice. "Tell me, Miss Ellis, what exactly are your intentions here?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" He circled me slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. A young woman with a problematic past suddenly becomes indispensable to the daughter of a man like me. Some might view that situation as an opportunity. Heat rushed to my face. I would never use a child that way, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Especially not one as special as Sophia. He stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Then why are you here, Charlotte Ellis? A woman educated at Princeton does not typically seek employment as a housekeeper. My blood ran cold. My education was not on my resume. I had deliberately omitted it, knowing it would raise questions I preferred not to answer. You have been investigating me. A slight curl touched his lips, not quite a smile. I investigate everyone who comes near my daughter. Then you know why I am here. I lifted my chin defiantly. My brother's care is expensive. My student loans are crushing. And thanks to the Harringtons, my degree is worthless in any field that requires a background check. So, it is purely financial. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. No, I admitted, my resolve softening. I genuinely care about Sophia. She reminds me of Jason, my brother, at that age. Brilliant, perceptive, but trapped in a world that doesn't understand how she experiences it. Something shifted in his expression, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. You speak of her autism as if it were a gift rather than an affliction. Isn't it both? I countered. Like many gifts, it comes with a price, but that doesn't diminish its value. He studied me for a long moment before abruptly changing course. Tomorrow is Sophia's piano lesson. It is typically challenging. I noticed it on her schedule. Is there something specific I should know? Her teacher, Miss Abernathy, doesn't fully appreciate Sophia's needs. She insists on techniques that Sophia finds distressing. His jaw tightened. Unfortunately, she is the only qualified teacher willing to come to the house given my reputation. I understood the unspoken request immediately. I will be there for the entire lesson. If Ms. Abernathy's methods become too overwhelming for Sophia, I will intervene. He nodded once. Good. Then, have dinner with me tonight. It wasn't a question. Sir, Sophia goes to bed at 8:30. Join me for dinner at 9 o'clock. There are matters regarding my daughter's care we need to discuss. Before I could respond, a sharp knock came at the door. Marco entered, his face grim. Sir, there is a situation that requires your immediate attention. Salvatore's expression hardened instantly. We will continue this conversation at dinner, Ms. Ellis. 9 o'clock. I recognized the dismissal and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Wear the blue dress in your closet. I glanced back, startled. It matches your eyes, he added, almost as an afterthought. The door closed behind me, leaving me breathless and confused in the hallway. How did he know the contents of my closet? And more disturbingly, why had my heart accelerated at the command in his voice? The piano lesson the next day was every bit the disaster Salvatore had suggested. Ms. Abernathy, a pinch-faced woman with bony hands and impatience radiating from every pore, clearly viewed Sophia's autism as an inconvenience rather than a neurological difference. No, no, no. She slapped the piano bench beside Sophia, causing the girl to flinch. You must curve your fingers properly. Sophia's hands began to flutter in that now familiar pattern of distress. I stepped forward from my position near the window. Perhaps Sophia could try a different approach, I suggested. Sometimes alternative techniques. I have been teaching piano for 30 years, young woman. Ms. Abernathy cut me off with a glare. I hardly need advice from a housekeeper. I bit back a sharp retort. Of course. I simply noticed that Sophia seems uncomfortable. Discomfort is part of learning. She turned back to Sophia, whose rocking had intensified. Now, again from the beginning. When Ms. Abernathy reached out to reposition Sophia's hands, the little girl let out a heart-wrenching whimper. Something protective and fierce ignited in my chest. That is enough for today, I said firmly, moving between them. I beg your pardon. Mr. Salvatore pays for a full hour, and we have barely begun. Mr. Salvatore pays for Sophia to learn piano, not to be traumatized by it. I kept my voice level but unyielding. The lesson is over. Miss Abernathy's face flushed an ugly red. I will be speaking to Mr. Salvatore about this insolence. I am counting on it. I turned my back on her and crouched beside Sophia, whose eyes were squeezed shut. It is all right now, Sophia. The music is taking a break. Would you like to go to your quiet room? She nodded almost imperceptibly. I heard Miss Abernathy gathering her things with aggressive movements, but I kept my attention focused entirely on Sophia. The piano teacher huffed as she stormed out. Once she was gone, Sophia's eyes opened. She looked directly at me, a rare occurrence that made my heart swell. The butterfly stays, she whispered. I smiled gently. Yes, the butterfly stays. The blue dress hung in my closet like a question. I had never seen it before today, yet there it was, silk, the color of a summer sky, simple yet elegant. It had appeared while I was helping Sophia with her afternoon routine, along with a note in masculine handwriting. I look forward to our dinner. I stared at myself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back. The dress fit perfectly, suspiciously so, as if it had been made for me. My brown hair, freed from its practical bun, fell in soft waves past my shoulders. I wore no jewelry, I owned none, but somehow the absence made the look more striking. At precisely 9 o'clock, a knock came at my door. I expected Mrs. Reynolds, but instead found Marco waiting in the hallway. Mr. Salvatore is ready for you, Ms. Ellis. He led me not to the formal dining room where the staff took their meals, but to a smaller, more intimate setting I hadn't seen before. A solarium, glass-walled and filled with exotic plants, overlooked the moonlit gardens. A single table was set for two, candlelight casting golden shadows, and there stood Antonio Salvatore without his usual entourage of watchful guards. He wore a black shirt open at the collar, no tie, with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, less formal than I had ever seen him, yet no less intimidating. His eyes traveled slowly from my face to the hem of the dress and back again, his expression unreadable. You look beautiful, Charlotte. My first name in his mouth sounded like a different word entirely, rich with meaning I couldn't or wouldn't decipher. Thank you for the dress, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Though I am curious how you knew my size. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I know everything about the people in my home. Marco pulled out my chair, and I sat, hyper-aware of Salvatore's presence across from me. A waiter appeared from nowhere, pouring wine. The ruby liquid swirled as it was poured into the crystal goblets. Ms. Abernathy contacted me today, he stated once we were in private. I stiffened, feeling distraught. I apologize if I overstepped my bounds. Do not apologize, he interrupted, dismissing my words with a sharp wave of his hand. I have terminated her employment. I blinked, stunned. You let her go. Nobody upsets my daughter. His tone brooked no argument. Furthermore, you were correct. Sophia deserves to learn in a manner that embraces her unique nature, not one that fights against it. The dinner conversation moved more smoothly than I had anticipated. Antonio, he had demanded I use his given name, at least in private settings, held an impressive grasp of autism spectrum disorders. He discussed therapies he had investigated, specialists he had consulted, and his evident frustration with a world that refused to adapt to his child's requirements. I have the power to construct empires and ruin men with a single phone call, he mused, rotating the wine in his glass. Yet, I am powerless to make this world gentler for my Sophia. In those instances, the dangerous crime lord faded, exposing a father frantically trying to shield his offspring. It was disarmingly human. This vulnerability appeared only when discussing Sophia. What happened to her mother? The inquiry escaped me before I could check myself, the wine and candlelight loosening my tongue. His expression hardened instantly. That is not a subject we discuss. I apologize, I said hastily. I shouldn't have asked. No, you shouldn't have. The warmth vanished from his voice. Certain doors, once unlocked, cannot be shut again, Charlotte. A sudden frost settled between us for the remainder of the meal, despite his unfailing courtesy. Upon finishing, he walked me to my room in silence, pausing at my threshold. You did well with Sophia today, he finally spoke. I won't forget that. Before I could reply, he grasped my hand, raising it to his lips and pressing a kiss to my knuckles. The action was old world, formal, yet the heat of his mouth on my skin sent a jolt of electricity racing up my arm. "Good night, Charlotte." He vanished before I could regain my composure, leaving me standing in the hallway with my heart pounding against my ribs and the phantom sensation of his touch lingering on my skin. Weeks drifted by, settling into patterns as rigid as Sophia's daily itinerary. I grew to love the little girl, with her brilliant intellect and distinct perspective on the world. We established a private language of signals and fragmented sentences. She started seeking my company, displaying her sketches, her collections of feathers and smooth stones, the prized treasures of her orderly universe. Antonio remained an enigma, appearing and vanishing like a storm front. Sometimes days would elapse where I only glimpsed him from a distance, encircled by his men, his face as unyielding as granite. At other times, he would materialize in Sophia's room while I read bedtime stories, listening from the shadows with an expression I couldn't interpret. Occasionally, he would invite me to dine with him once Sophia was asleep. We would converse late into the night about his daughter, about literature, and about everything excluding his true identity and the events behind those basement doors on Tuesdays. I started to dread Tuesdays, not for my sake, but for the darkness they brought to Antonio's eyes. He was always altered afterward, colder, more remote, as if he needed to rebuild the walls between the man who cared for his daughter and the man who inspired terror in others. "You shouldn't look at me that way," he remarked one evening as we sat in his study, the firelight casting shadows across his sharp features. "What way?" I queried, though I knew precisely what he implied. "Like you are trying to reconcile two separate men." His eyes, almost black in the flickering light, locked onto mine. "There are not two Antonios, Charlotte. There is only one. Remember that." Yet I couldn't help but see the contradictions. The tenderness with which he spoke of Sophia contrasted with the cold efficiency I glimpsed when he dealt with his business associates, the gentle way he never touched his daughter without permission versus the casual displays of dominance he exhibited with everyone else, myself included. A hand on the small of my back guiding me through doorways. Fingers brushing my arm to emphasize a point. Those dark eyes tracking my movements when he thought I wouldn't notice. I told myself I was imagining the latter. That the tension I felt when he was near was simply fear, not something more dangerous, more forbidden. I was his daughter's caretaker, nothing more. The beautiful dresses that continued to appear in my closet, the books he left on my nightstand that I'd mentioned wanting to read, the way he'd begun to include me in family dinners with Sophia, these were merely the actions of a grateful father, not a man with other intentions. At least that's what I desperately needed to believe. The morning everything changed dawned cold and clear, frost etching delicate patterns on the windows. I was helping Sophia with her math exercises, which were far beyond a typical third-grade level, when Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the door, her perpetual composure visibly shaken. "Miss Ellis, you're needed downstairs immediately." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. "What's wrong?" "It's not my place to say." Her eyes darted to Sophia, then back to me. "Marco will stay with Miss Sophia." I squeezed Sophia's shoulder gently. "I'll be back soon. Keep working on these problems and we'll check them together." "Okay." She nodded without looking up, already absorbed in her calculations. Mrs. Reynolds led me not to Antonio's study, but to a smaller room near the front entrance. When she opened the door, I froze in shock. Two police officers stood inside. Between them was a face I'd hoped never to see again. James Harrington, the son of my former employer, the man whose lies had destroyed my career. "Charlotte Ellis?" one of the officers asked. I nodded mutely. "These gentlemen are here about the theft charges Mr. Harrington has filed against you," Mrs. Reynolds explained, her voice brittle. James smirked, his handsome face as punchable as I remembered. "Hello, Charlotte. Imagine my surprise when I heard you'd found employment with the esteemed Mr. Salvatore." "There must be some mistake," I said, finding my voice at last. "Those accusations were proven false. The charges were dropped. New evidence has come to light," the older officer said, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Harrington's mother discovered additional missing items, and security footage has surfaced that places you at the scene." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I never took anything." "Then you won't mind coming down to the station to clear this up." The younger officer stepped forward, handcuffs glinting ominously in his hand. "This is absurd," I protested, panic rising in my throat. "I can't leave. I'm responsible for Mr. Salvatore's daughter. She needs consistency, routine." "Should have thought about that before you decided to steal," James said with mock sympathy. Just then, the door opened. Antonio Salvatore stood in the threshold, his presence immediately dominating the room. He wore a charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the light, his expression controlled, but his eyes blazing with cold fury. "What is happening here?" His voice was soft, dangerously so. The officers straightened instinctively. Even they weren't immune to the authority he radiated. "Mr. Salvatore," the older one began, "we have a warrant for Ms. Ellis's arrest regarding theft charges from her previous employer." Antonio's gaze shifted to James Harrington, who had the good sense to look uncomfortable under that penetrating stare. "Mr. Harrington," Antonio said, his Italian accent more pronounced than usual. "What an unexpected pleasure, Mr. Salvatore." James cleared his throat. "This is just a legal matter." "A legal matter," Antonio repeated the words like ice, "in my home, involving my daughter's caretaker, without my knowledge." He crossed to his desk and pressed a button. Within seconds, Marco appeared along with two other security men I recognized from Antonio's entourage. "Gentlemen," Antonio said to the officers, "I understand you have a job to do. However, Ms. Ellis is essential to my daughter's care. Removing her without warning would cause my child significant distress." "Sir, we have a warrant," the younger officer began. "Of course," Antonio cut him off smoothly. "And you will execute it after my attorney arrives to review it. In the meantime, perhaps we can discuss this situation like civilized men." He turned to James. "Mr. Harrington, I believe your father and I have mutual associates. Giovanni Vinucci, for instance." The color drained from James's face. I didn't know who Giovanni Vinucci was, but clearly, the name held significance. "Yes, I believe they've done business," James stammered. "How fortunate. I'm sure a single phone call could clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding." Antonio smiled, a gesture that never reached his eyes. "Marco, please escort our guests to the West Parlor. Offer them refreshments while we wait for my attorney." Marco stepped forward, his posture making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "Mrs. Reynolds, take Miss Ellis back to Sophia. She doesn't need to concern herself with this matter any further." "But sir," I protested. Antonio silenced me with a look. "It's handled, Charlotte. Go to my daughter." I hesitated, torn between relief and concern about what handled might entail. "Now, please," he added, his tone gentler, but no less commanding. As I left, I caught James Harrington's expression, a man realizing too late that he had made a grave miscalculation. That evening, after Sophia was asleep, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Antonio standing there, his tie loosened, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. "May I come in?" I stepped back to allow him entry, acutely aware that we'd never been alone in my room before. He moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds. "The charges have been dropped," he said without preamble. "Permanently this time. Mr. Harrington has signed a statement admitting the accusations were fabricated out of personal vendetta." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you, but I have to ask, what did you do to make him confess?" Antonio turned, his expression unreadable in the half-light. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I said firmly. "It matters to me." He studied me for a long moment. "I simply made it clear that continuing his vendetta against you would be more costly than he was prepared to pay. You threatened him." I reminded him of reality. Antonio took a sip of his whiskey. "Men like James Harrington only understand power and consequences." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the room's warmth. "And men like you understand how to wield both." Something flickered in his eyes. Anger perhaps, or disappointment. "Yes, men like me." He set down his glass and moved toward me, stopping close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. "Does that frighten you, Charlotte?" "Should it?" I didn't back away, though every instinct screamed for me to create distance between us. "Yes." His voice dropped lower. "You should be terrified. Of you. Of this. Before I could process his meaning, his hand cupped my cheek, his touch startlingly gentle for a man with so much power, so much darkness. Of what I want from you. My breath caught. What do you want from me? His thumb traced my lower lip, sending shivers down my spine. Everything. The single word hung between us, heavy with implication. I knew I should step back, establish boundaries, remember who he was, and all the reasons why this was impossible. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my body betraying my better judgment. Sophia, I began, searching for an anchor in the storm. A tidal wave of feelings that threatened to submerge me completely. She adores you, he concluded. And so do I, although my manner of showing it is quite different. His admission, delivered with such factual calm, rendered me speechless. Speak to me, Charlotte. A note of vulnerability, previously foreign to his tone, crept in. This is dangerous, I breathed, uncertain if the danger lay with him, myself, or Sophia. Anything of value carries danger. His hand moved to my waist, pulling me in. The only question is if the prize is worth the gamble. I flattened my palm against his chest, sensing the steady thrum of his heart beneath the fine fabric and hard muscle. My intent was to shove him away, to be rational, to recall every reason this was a terrible mistake. Instead, my fingers curled into his shirt, dragging him closer. His lips captured mine with a leashed starvation, as though he had denied himself for ages. One hand wove through my hair, the other pressed into the curve of my back, welding me to him. I dissolved into the kiss, my fortress of logic burning down like paper in a fire. When we finally separated, gasping for air, his gaze bored into mine. Command me to stop, and I will. Just one word, Charlotte, and I walk out that door. The option he presented, sincere, despite the hunger darkening his eyes, emboldened me. This man, who ruled empires with an iron grip, was granting me dominion over him, however fleeting. Stay, I whispered. A smile reshaped his features, melting the severity, unveiling the human beneath the armor. For a split second, I saw Antonio, distinct from Salvatore. The father, not the feared mob boss. But as his lips descended once more, I recognized the truth he'd cautioned me about. There were no separate men. There was only him, and I was accepting the whole package, shadows and all. Morning light discovered us entwined in my sheets, his arm a heavy weight across my waist, my head resting on his chest where the steady beat of his heart was audible. Asleep, the perilous aura that usually cloaked him had faded, lending him an almost tranquil appearance. I followed the path of a scar along his collarbone, curious about its origin but wise enough not to pry. His physique was a library of violence, a map of old and fresh wounds hinting at a history I could barely conceive. His eyes snapped open, instantly awake in that specific way of men used to peril. Catching me observing him, a lazy smile stretched across his face. Good morning, he rasped, voice gravelly with sleep. Good morning. I couldn't suppress my own smile, even as uncertainty churned beneath my surface contentment. We need to discuss. He silenced me with a finger to my lips. Later. Right now, I only want to view you in the morning light. His stare swept over me with an intensity that ignited a blush on my skin. Then his demeanor shifted, gravity returning. Sophia will be up shortly, he noted, checking the clock beside the bed. We shouldn't disturb her schedule. His daughter's name brought reality crashing down. What had I done? I had complicated a fragile dynamic, possibly risking Sophia's balance and my own role in her life. Antonio deciphered my look with terrifying precision. Regrets already? Not regrets, I corrected cautiously. Just considerations. Sophia requires consistency, stability. Whatever exists between us cannot impede her care. He nodded, face somber. Agreed. That is why discretion is paramount, at least for the moment. And what exactly is this? I asked, craving a label, parameters, solid ground to stand on. Antonio sat up, the sheet sliding to his waist to expose a torso etched with the toll of a brutal life. He grasped my hand, his touch unexpectedly tender. This is me desiring you. Not merely in my bed, but in my existence. With Sophia. With me. His eyes held mine, unwavering. I do not take these decisions lightly, Charlotte. Neither do I answered softly. But your life is complex. A harsh chuckle escaped him. That is a diplomatic phrasing. I care for Sophia too much to risk becoming a disruption. And your world, the Tuesday gatherings, men with guns, threats that require handling. I don't belong in that world. His expression steeled slightly. Yet, you are here for Sophia. Only for her? The question hung in the air between us, demanding total honesty. I averted my gaze first. I should get ready. It's nearly time for her breakfast. Antonio stood, collecting his scattered clothes with efficient movements. I observed his transformation back into the flawless, unreachable Mr. Salvatore. The armor was reassembled, piece by piece. Pausing at the threshold, he said, "This discussion is not finished, Charlotte." It hovered somewhere between a vow and a threat. For the next 2 weeks, we performed an intricate dance. By day, before Sophia and the household staff, we upheld a strict, formal employer-employee relationship. By night, he would slip into my room or summon me to his, and we would lose ourselves in one another until the dawn threatened to expose our secret. I convinced myself it was temporary, that I would eventually regain my senses and recall who he was and what he did. Yet, with every touch, every time I unearthed a new layer of the complex man behind the terrifying reputation, I tumbled further into a labyrinth I wasn't sure I wished to escape. One evening, as we lay in his massive bed, he idly traced designs on my bare shoulder, looking pensive. "Sophia posed an interesting question today," he said. I turned to face him. "Oh." "She asked if you were going to become her new mother." My breath hitched. "What did you tell her?" I asked her thoughts on the possibility. His eyes, typically so guarded, were open and vulnerable. "She said the blue butterfly would stay forever." I sat up, clutching the sheet around me. "Antonio, you cannot just." "Cannot what?" "Envision a future where you are more than my daughter's caretaker. More than just my lover." "We've barely known one another 3 months, I protested, though time felt like a flimsy objection compared to the fundamental differences in our worlds. "I knew after 3 days, he stated simply. "The way you understood Sophia. Saw her as she truly is. The way you stood up to me when everyone else cowers. That isn't a foundation for whatever you are suggesting." He sat up beside me, cupping my face in his hands. "I am not suggesting anything yet. I am telling you that my daughter perceives what is happening between us, because children, especially children like Sophia, notice everything. And I am asking you to consider what you want this to be." I leaned into his touch despite myself. "I want what is best for Sophia. As do I. Always." His thumb stroked my cheek. "But perhaps what is best for her is also what is best for us." Before I could respond, a sharp knock came at the bedroom door. Antonio went rigid, instantly on alert. No one would dare interrupt him unless it was urgent. "Sir." Marco's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Antonio was out of bed in an instant, pulling on pants and a robe. "What is it?" "It is Miss Sophia, sir. She is missing." The world seemed to stop. Antonio froze for a heartbeat, then exploded into action, throwing open the door to find Marco standing there, face ashen. "What do you mean, missing?" Antonio's voice was deadly quiet. I scrambled from the bed, wrapping myself in the sheet. "When was she last seen?" Marco's eyes widened slightly at the sight of me in his boss's bedroom, but he recovered quickly. "Mrs. Reynolds checked on her at 9 p.m. as usual. When I made the midnight security sweep, her bed was empty. Antonio was already striding down the hallway. Lock down the property. Every inch of the grounds, every room. Find her now." I rushed back to my room, throwing on clothes haphazardly. My mind raced through possibilities. Sophia had never left her room at night before, never broken her routine. Something was terribly wrong. I ran to her bedroom, hoping against hope that she'd returned. The empty bed with its butterfly-patterned comforter sent a chill through me. I scanned the room, looking for clues, anything that might indicate where she'd gone or why. Her closet door stood ajar. Inside, I noticed her emergency backpack was missing. The one she'd meticulously packed with essentials for what she called bad days. It contained her favorite blue sweater, a small photo of her and Antonio, her special blue butterfly hair clip, and a few other comfort items. She'd left voluntarily then, but why? And where would she go? I hurried downstairs to find the house in controlled chaos. Security teams were sweeping every room, checking surveillance footage. Antonio stood in the center of his study, issuing rapid-fire commands, his face a mask of controlled terror. "Her emergency pack is gone," I said as I entered. "She took it with her." His head snapped toward me. "You're sure?" "Positive." "She packed it herself, showed me where she kept it just in case." "In case of what?" he demanded. "She never specified. Just, bad days." I tried to think like Sophia, to see the world through her perfectly ordered lens. Has anything changed recently? Anything disrupted her routine or upset her? Antonio ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. "Nothing. Everything has been exactly as she." He stopped abruptly, realization dawning on his face. "Us. You and me. But we've been so careful," I protested. "And she seemed positive about the idea when she asked you. Children say what they think adults want to hear sometimes." His voice was hollow. "Even Sophia." Marco burst into the room. "Sir, we found something on the East Wing cameras, 40 minutes ago. Miss Sophia left through the garden door. Alone." Antonio's voice cracked on the word. "Yes, sir. Voluntary movement. No signs of distress. She appeared to know exactly where she was going." I closed my eyes, thinking. "The willow tree," I said suddenly. "By the pond." Both men turned to me. "She talks about it sometimes. Says it's where she goes in her head when things get too loud, too overwhelming. She's drawn it dozens of times." Antonio was already moving, barking orders to focus the search on the eastern grounds. I followed, grabbing a flashlight from one of the security team members. The night air was biting, winter approaching with icy fingers. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself, thinking with dread of Sophia in her thin pajamas, alone in the darkness she feared. Antonio moved ahead of me, his longer strides eating up the distance. Security teams fanned out across the grounds, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. The pond lay at the far edge of the property, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens, now eerily silent in the moonlight. The ancient willow tree stood like a sentinel at the water's edge, its sweeping branches creating a curtained sanctuary. Antonio reached it first, pushing aside the trailing branches. His sudden, sharp intake of breath told me he'd found her before I could see for myself. Sophia sat curled against the massive trunk, her knees drawn to her chest, the emergency backpack beside her. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue from the cold. "Sophia." Antonio breathed, relief and fear mingling in his voice. He crouched before her, careful not to touch her without permission. "Tesoro, are you hurt?" She shook her head, not looking at him. "The butterfly is confused," she whispered. I knelt beside Antonio, my heart breaking at the sight of. Her distress was palpable. "Sophia, we were frantic with worry. Why did you wander out here all by yourself?" Her dark eyes, which mirrored her father's so perfectly, finally rose to meet mine. "You were in Papa's room." The pattern was altered. Antonio recoiled physically, as though he had been struck. "The butterfly doesn't know where to go now," she whispered, her voice sounding tiny and adrift. "If you are in Papa's room, where does Sophia go?" The realization hit me with clarity. In her structured universe, every individual had a designated coordinate, her father in his room, me in mine, and she in hers. Our nocturnal rendezvous had shattered the routine she required to navigate her existence. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly. "Your place is always right here with us, regardless of where we are. You are the single most important person to both of us." Antonio reached out toward his daughter with slow, deliberate movements. "May I carry you inside, Sophia? You are shivering." She paused for a moment, then offered a microscopic nod. He gathered her into his arms with infinite tenderness, holding her tight against his chest as he rose to his full height. Suddenly, Sophia extended one hand toward me. Charlotte, too, she insisted. Both. I grasped her chilled little hand in mine, and together we walked back toward the house, a delicate new pattern emerging with every step we took. Everything shifted after that night. The careful boundaries Antonio and I had maintained collapsed under the weight of Sophia's anxiety. Children, and particularly those on the spectrum, require absolute honesty, consistency, and clearly defined patterns. Our attempt at discretion had only generated confusion and fear. The morning after we discovered Sophia beneath the willow tree, Antonio convened a family meeting. It was his phrasing, not mine, though the words made my heart flutter traitorously. We gathered in the sunroom, where the morning light poured through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like miniature stars. Sophia, Antonio began, his tone gentler than I had ever heard it. I need to explain something significant about Charlotte and me. The little girl sat rigidly in her chair, hands clasped in her lap, her dark gaze shifting between her father and me. I noted she was wearing the blue butterfly clip in her hair, which I took as a positive signal. Charlotte is special to me, Antonio continued. In a different way than you are special to me. You are my daughter, my heart. That is immutable, nothing will ever change that. And Charlotte? Sophia asked, her voice quiet but steady. Antonio looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I offered a slight nod, granting him permission to proceed. Charlotte is someone I care for very deeply, someone who brings me happiness, and someone who understands both of us. He leaned in closer, careful to respect the physical distance Sophia preferred. Sometimes she will spend time with me in my room. Sometimes we will spend time in her room. However, you will always know our location. And you can always find us if you need us. Sophia processed this, her brilliant mind analyzing the new data. Like a new pattern, she finally concluded. Yes, precisely like a new pattern, Antonio agreed. One that incorporates all three of us. She turned her attention to me then. Will you still read me stories every night? I promised, I replied. That won't change. And brush my hair. 20 strokes per section? Exactly 20, I assured her with a warm smile. She appeared satisfied, but then a small frown creased her forehead. The men who visit on Tuesdays, they won't hurt Charlotte. Antonio tensed beside me. I had never explicitly asked about his business, maintaining a deliberate separation between the man I was falling in love with and the dangerous world he inhabited. But Sophia, with her unflinching perception, had dragged it into the light. No one will ever harm Charlotte, Antonio declared, his voice dropping to that lethal quiet register I had learned was far more dangerous than any shout. I would never allow it. Sophia nodded, apparently reassured. I'm hungry. The abrupt shift in topic was so characteristic of her that I couldn't help but laugh, the tension draining from the room. Pancakes, I suggested. It's Saturday. Butterfly shapes, she mandated, sliding off her chair. With the syrup separate. As she walked toward the kitchen, Antonio caught my hand, pulling me close. Thank you, he murmured against my hair. For what? For understanding her. For understanding me. His arms tightened around me. For being willing to attempt this unconventional family arrangement. I pulled back slightly to look him in the eye. I haven't agreed to anything permanent yet. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Yet. Life settled into a new routine. I spent most nights with Antonio, but I always returned to my own room before dawn to preserve the morning schedule Sophia depended on. We were careful to be transparent about our whereabouts, creating a color-coded chart that hung in Sophia's room so she always knew where to find each of us. To my surprise, she thrived under the new arrangement. Perhaps it was the honesty, the removal of the confusing secrecy. Or perhaps it was simply having two people who loved her working together openly to create the stability she craved. One evening, about 2 weeks after our family meeting, I was helping Sophia organize her rock collection, categorized by color, size, and what she termed friendship potential when she made an announcement. I want to call you Mama. The simple statement nearly stopped my heart. I set down the smooth quartz crystal I had been examining and turned to face her fully. Sophia, I'm very honored that you would think of me that way. She continued arranging stones in their velvet-lined box, not looking at me. My real mother didn't want me. Papa said she couldn't understand my special brain. The matter-of-fact way she delivered this information made my chest ache. Sometimes people don't understand the value of what they have, I said carefully. You understand, she stated, still focused on her task. And you want to stay. The butterfly says so. I blinked back sudden tears. The butterfly is right. I do want to stay. Then you can be my mama. She placed the final stone in its designated spot and closed the box with a satisfying click. Papa wants you to be my mama, too. He keeps the ring in his desk drawer. My breath caught in my throat. What ring, Sophia? She gave me a look that clearly questioned my intelligence. The ring to ask you to marry him. In the blue box. Top right drawer. Behind the picture of me. Before I could process this bombshell, delivered with such casual certainty, Antonio appeared in the doorway. He took in my shocked expression and Sophia's satisfied smile and raised an eyebrow. Everything okay in here? Sophia just told me about a ring, I said, watching his face carefully. A rare flash of genuine surprise crossed his features, followed by something akin to resignation. His eyes moved to his daughter. Have you been in my desk, Sophia? No, she said truthfully. Marco was looking for stamps. He found it. He told Giovanni it was pretty. I heard them. Antonio shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. Nothing stays secret in this house, it seems. My heart raced as implications cascaded through my mind. Marriage. Becoming Sophia's stepmother officially. Becoming Mrs. Salvatore, wife to a man whose business I still knew almost nothing about, whose power and danger I could only glimpse. We'll talk later, Antonio said softly, correctly reading my overwhelmed expression. Sophia, it's time for your bath. As I rose to help with her evening routine, he caught my arm gently. Let Mrs. Reynolds handle it tonight. I think you and I need to have a conversation. 20 minutes later, we sat in his study, the same room where we had first met, where I had first encountered Sophia. It felt like years ago rather than months. Antonio leaned against his desk, arms crossed over his chest, watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. So, he said finally, you know about the ring. Apparently, everyone knows about the ring except me, I replied, aiming for lightness despite my racing heart. He moved to the desk, opened the drawer Sophia had described, and extracted a small blue velvet box. This wasn't how I planned to do this. How did you plan to do it? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. With more romance. He came to stand before me, but instead of kneeling as I half expected, he simply held out the box. Look at it, then we'll talk. I took the box with trembling fingers and opened it. Nestled inside was a ring of such understated elegance it took my breath away. A perfect oval sapphire surrounded by a halo of smaller diamonds set in platinum. It's beautiful, I whispered. It reminded me of your eyes. He took the box back, removing the ring. I'm not asking you to wear it. Not yet. But I want you to know my intentions. Antonio, he held up a hand. Let me finish, please. He set the ring on the desk beside him. I know what I am, Charlotte. I have no illusions about the world I inhabit or the things I've done. But I also know what I feel for you. What I feel when I see you with my daughter. When I wake up with you beside me. When you challenge me in ways no one else would dare. I remained silent, afraid that if I spoke, I would break the spell of his rare vulnerability. I want you in my life permanently. As Sophia's mother, as my wife. But I understand that accepting that means accepting everything, including parts of my life I've kept separate from you. There it was, the elephant in the room, the subject we had carefully danced around for months. The Tuesday meetings, I said softly. He nodded. Among other things. Tell me. His eyes bored into mine. Once I tell you, there's no going back. No plausible deniability. If you're asking me to consider spending my life with you, raising Sophia with you, I need to know exactly what that life entails. I straightened my spine, bracing myself. No more compartmentalize, Antonio. All of you or none of you. Something like respect flashed in his eyes. He moved to the bar cart in the corner, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and handed one to me before taking a seat across from me. My father came to America from Sicily in the 1960s, he began, his voice taking on a cadence I hadn't heard before, a more pronounced accent, a distinct rhythm. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and connections to certain families in New York. He built an empire through those connections. Import-export businesses, construction companies, waste management, real estate, all legitimate on paper. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn ground me. By the time I was born, he was a wealthy man, respected and feared. He sent me to the best schools, taught me everything he knew about business, both kinds. Antonio's eyes never left mine. When he died, I inherited everything, including his position within the organization. The mafia, I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue. We don't use that term, but yes, la familia. He took a long swallow of whiskey. I've worked hard to legitimize much of the business. The construction companies, the import-export, the real estate, they're clean now, profitable through legal means. But not everything. No, he admitted, some aspects remain traditional. Protection rackets, drugs, human trafficking. I forced myself to ask the worst questions, needing to know the boundaries. His expression hardened. I have lines I don't cross. No trafficking ever. No dealing with children. The drugs. We control territory. We take a percentage from those who operate within it. But we don't handle the product directly. And the protection. Insurance, he corrected with a slight smile. Businesses pay. We ensure nothing unfortunate happens to them. By threatening them yourself, I said flatly. By guarding them against those who would inflict worse. He leaned in closer. It is complex, Charlotte. The world is not simply black and white. People get hurt, I whispered, my voice faint. Yes. He offered no denial. No excuses, only honesty. Individuals who cross the line, who threaten what belongs to me, who put the family at risk, like James Harrington, I said, recalling the intensity of his expression when that name was spoken. Vinucci. James Harrington was a privileged boy pretending to be a man. He required a lesson in consequences. Antonio's tone was dismissive. He was never in mortal peril, merely strongly persuaded to rethink his path. I took another sip of whiskey, struggling to align this dark reality with the man who read stories to his daughter at night, who held me with such gentleness, who remembered the books I wished to read. And Sophia's mother, I asked, the question that had burned inside me for months. What became of her? Antonio went perfectly still. For a second, I feared he wouldn't reply. Francesca was stunning, driven, the daughter of an associate from the old country. His voice was disciplined. Our marriage was arranged, a strategic benefit to both families. She desired the lifestyle, the status. She did not desire a child, certainly not one requiring special attention, one who didn't match her image of perfection. My heart broke for Sophia, for the rejection she endured from the one person who should have loved her most. When Sophia received her autism diagnosis, Francesca changed. She became cruel. I discovered bruises on my daughter's arms. Antonio's eyes turned icy, remote. No one hurts my child. No one. A shiver traced my spine. What did you do? I offered her a choice. Leave. Never contact us again. Take a generous settlement or stay and face the repercussions for harming Sophia. She chose to leave, I said, feeling relief. Yes. His answer came too fast, his eyes too empty. Antonio, I pushed, needing the full truth. Is she alive? The silence hung heavy between us. To my knowledge, he finally said. She resides in Milan, remarried to a designer, no children. The contract requires regular proof of her well-being, provided she keeps her distance from Sophia. The calculated logic of the arrangement was both comforting and terrifying. This was the man I had fallen for, capable of both tender devotion and cold justice. Thank you for the truth, I said softly. All of it, he affirmed. No more secrets, Charlotte. I stood, placing my glass down, and walked to the window. Outside, the garden slept under the approach of winter, awaiting spring. Like my own life, standing at a crossroads. I need time, I said, watching the window, to process all of this. To understand what it means for me, for my future, and for my relationship with Sophia. I heard him stand, felt his heat behind me, not touching, but close enough to sense. Take all the time you require, he said. But know this, my feelings will not shift. What I desire will not change. I turned to face him. And what is that exactly? You. As my wife, as Sophia's mother, as the center of whatever family we build. His eyes, usually so guarded, were entirely open now, vulnerable in a way I had never witnessed. I love you, Charlotte. I think I have since the moment you knelt on my office floor to fix my daughter's tights. The words, so simply spoken, hit me with physical impact. In all our time together, through nights of passion and days of building our unique family, neither of us had spoken those 3 words. I love Sophia, I said cautiously. That I know for certain. Pain flashed across his face at my deliberate omission. And you, I continued, reaching up to touch his face. You, I love in ways that scare me because loving you means accepting all of you. The father, the lover, and yes, the man who holds Tuesday meetings in the basement. Hope lit his eyes. Is that a yes? It is a not yet, I clarified. I need to be sure, Antonio. Not just for me, but for Sophia. She called me Mama today. If I stay, if I wear your ring, there is no going back for her. I will not risk breaking her heart unless I am absolutely positive. He nodded, accepting my terms with a grace I hadn't anticipated. How will you know when you are certain? I smiled faintly. I imagine it will be like Sophia's blue butterfly. It will appear when it is safe. Winter melted into spring, and the ring stayed in its blue velvet box in Antonio's drawer. He never pressured me, never brought it up, though I sometimes caught him watching me with Sophia, a question in his eyes I wasn't ready to answer. Sophia continued to call me Mama, a title I accepted with both joy and fear. We settled into the rhythm of family life. Breakfast together, Antonio joining when he could. Weekends exploring museums that suited Sophia's sensory needs. Quiet evenings reading in the library, the 3 of us in comfortable silence. The Tuesday meetings persisted, but Antonio no longer disappeared behind an impenetrable wall afterward. Instead, he would find me once Sophia was asleep, sometimes with shadows in his eyes, sometimes with tension in his shoulders, and silently seek the comfort of my arms. I learned to read the signs, to know when to ask and when to simply be present. I learned there were parts of his business I could influence, pushing for legitimate investments, suggesting community initiatives that built goodwill while genuinely helping people. Most importantly, I learned that loving Antonio didn't mean condoning everything he did. It meant accepting the complexity of the man, recognizing the fierce protector alongside the ruthless enforcer, understanding that in his world the 2 were inseparable. One perfect May morning, Sophia and I were in the garden planting flowers in the beds outside my window. Pansies and forget-me-nots in careful patterns she had designed with mathematical precision. Blue butterflies like these flowers, she stated, patting soil around a delicate plant. Do they? How do you know? I asked, enjoying her rare, chatty mood. I researched, she said seriously. For my project. What project is that, sweetheart? Instead of answering, she reached into the pocket of her gardening apron and pulled out something small that caught the sunlight. She held it out to me with solemn ceremony. In her palm lay the sapphire ring from Antonio's desk. My breath hitched. Sophia, where did you get that? Papa said it was time. She continued holding it out, unwavering. He said the butterfly knows it is safe now. I looked up to find Antonio standing at the garden's edge, watching us with that intensity that still made my heart race after all these months. He walked toward us slowly, as if afraid of startling me. I promised I wouldn't pressure you, he said when he reached us. And I have kept that promise, but Sophia had this idea. We made a family, Sophia stated matter-of-factly, still holding out the ring. It needs to be official for the pattern to be complete. I looked between them. This dangerous, complex man and his extraordinary daughter, both watching me with identical dark eyes filled with identical hope. In that moment, I realized the truth I had been circling for months. Family isn't always what you expect. Sometimes it is found in the most unlikely places with the most unlikely people. Sometimes it is a little girl who sees the world through different eyes and a man whose darkness is balanced by the fiercest capacity for love I had ever witnessed. Yes, I said simply, holding out my hand to Sophia. With careful precision, she slipped the ring onto my finger, her face lighting up with a rare, brilliant smile. Pattern complete, she announced with satisfaction. Antonio gathered us both into his arms. The three of us together in the spring sunshine, surrounded by blue flowers awaiting their butterflies. Not complete, he murmured against my hair. Just beginning. And in that moment, standing in the garden of a home that had once seemed like a gilded cage, but now felt like sanctuary, I knew he was right. Our story, complicated, unconventional, sometimes dangerous, but always anchored by love, was just beginning. The blue butterfly had found its safe place, and so had I.